Hello and welcome to the Berkcast, the How to Train Dragon podcast. I'm your host, HC. With me are.
Rush 2112.
Voyager.
And Wolf.
Yup, all four of us together again, even though we only had like one episode of all of us together. But what does it matter? All four of us are together here to pretty much continue the celebration question mark of a race to of the ending of the edge.
You're in
So
trouble,
the show
HC,
is
aren't
done.
you?
He said the show's ending.
Yeah.
Of course the Dragon Police would come after him for that.
But the show is over. It's been a week since the final season hit Netflix, and we all reviewed it. Go watch it if you haven't, because we need it. But now that the entire show is done, we can pretty much talk about all of it in all the seasons, all the episodes, all the characters. Let's just do one final hurrah for this TV show before we start focusing on the three. So let's do this. So our overall thoughts on the entire show and its run. Who wants to start?
May I?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. I think it was ugly, but I loved it. Ugly in a visual sense because they never upgraded the textures. The only thing that kept getting better and better was the fire effects, and they just started to outshine everything else at some point. Also, the models, but it's still dragons, and I always love dragons. So overall, yes, I loved it, but it ran for 6 years, which, putting it in perspective, got me through high school, and now I'm in college. So my only really overall critique of it is that it didn't really grow up with its audience. Yeah, I would just say that kind of towards the end of this run right now on Netflix, I just kind of was able to look at it and go, oh, yeah, I still love it. It's dragons, but this is a kid show, isn't it? Kind of thing. Which was just an interesting perspective to really look back and think about how long it's been going on, for real.
I do like that. Before you go, Rush, I just want to say that I love that you said you don't think the only thing in the animation that improved for you is the fire effects.
Yeah.
So it's one thing. So I love that it's the one thing that was made better as the show kept going. It's good.
One thing that you said that
Anyway,
actually, that I found really interesting is you said it didn't grow up with its audience, and I completely agree. Although it's funny that you still get those people that's like, oh, small cup is best cup. Like they didn't want him to grow up, or even they didn't even want the show to grow up with them. Regardless of that, I really like the show. Despite just all those issues with the canon that people were having, and some things I couldn't, explain away. I really enjoyed it. I think it was good for as far as a bridge goes. Obviously, you never do anything perfect, so yes, it could have been done better, but it could have been way worse than it was. I mean, this was on the spectrum. This was definitely at least on the 3/4 of the good side, as opposed to in the middle towards horrible, for me.
Wolf, your turn.
I mean, I'm someone who, for me, saying, the show didn't grow up with me. I was already way older than all of these characters anyways when I first got into the show. And I've just gotten older still. So for me, coming into the show, being in the show, do what?
Old.
Too
There
old.
was a song in I think that when I think it was Mr. Krabs when he wakes up and there's a song on the radio going, "You're old."
Oh, that song, yeah.
Oh.
It's definitely, so I never really, I couldn't grow up with this, right? But it was still a lot of fun, and especially as someone who got into the show first, and the show, basically getting me into the franchise as a whole. It definitely kind of holds a bit of a special place in my heart, I would still say. Yes, it's not perfect and it absolutely has its faults, but I still found it enjoyable. I still had a lot of fun with it. It still made me laugh and made me smile throughout all of its run, even when it was being a little bit, even when it was definitely being way more silly than it needed to be at times, and definitely, I would say like, you know, yeah, I enjoyed it.
I
I
agree.
had fun with
And
it.
just what I meant about growing up, though, it's not like the characters physically growing up so much as it's just them exploring themes a little deeper.
Oh yeah,
So we
absolutely.
see like, yeah, so we see like a little bit of death. We get a little bit of, kind of beefy emotional stuff, but it never really
Got
goes too far.
Yeah.
Yeah, the twins always like bring it back with some joke about a popsicle or something, and it cheapens it a little bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think we had a minor point on that at one point where like the twins, or maybe I was just talking with somebody how like they need to reel the twins back as funny as they are, but then there are some people that think the twins are gods, or sorry, Loki's on Earth, and that they need more twins. It's like, please no.
Mm-mm.
So
Yeah. Okay. So if I may go on this, one thing I do want to say is that in terms of like this show has been on for 6 years and 8 seasons, which for an animated show
Man.
nowadays it's really impressive because not a lot of animated shows make it to season 8. No, unless your name is SpongeBob SquarePants. Is there really any animated show?
Well, anything that's like ran before a certain time period, like anything that's new as of, let's say, mid 2000s, nothing goes that far.
Yeah.
Anything that was like pre 2005, those shows went on for a long time.
Like I think, okay, let's say this show premiered in 2012. Is there any animated show post 2010 which made it this far?
Did Adventure Time? Is it that?
Adventure Time's still going, yeah.
Yeah, and they're like at season 12 or something. Regular show made it to season 8, but like, and they specifically ended there.
Gravity Falls went on for a while as well, but
there's only 2 quote-unquote seasons.
Yeah, it's definitely only 2 seasons as far as I'm aware. And I think My Little Pony, the new one, is going on for 7 seasons. I'm not sure. I never watched it, so I just know it's been around for a while.
How long did Clone Wars last?
Oh, that's a good one.
That was. I can look real quick.
Yeah, we'd have to ask some people for that who are more.
Okay, but the point I'm bringing up is that it is an impressive time and an impressive run that it had, especially considering that if you like the show or not, it's a different story. But I think the fact that throughout all of these 8 seasons, there was sort of like the quality was quote unquote kept. It never felt like it ran into a seasonal rut. It never felt like you just wanted it to end at one point, if you know what I mean. Like let me think. There are shows that were supposed to end, but then they got renewed.
Overstayed their welcome is what you're trying to say, right?
Yeah,
I might disagree a little bit, but that's all right.
Voyager's all for that.
Well,
no season 5 or 6 renewal. When she got that news, she's like, damn
it. Maybe even a little bit earlier, but
that was our very third episode we did. That it was announced that they were renewed. But okay, let me give you a better example. I brought up SpongeBob earlier. This is a show that went on for so long.
Let it die.
That eventually, they kind of ran out of ideas and started making. They pretty much the excuse for everything was that you're supposed to laugh because SpongeBob is the main character, and you can't hate the main character. So Dragons didn't ever made you feel like you can that the writers think that you need to love Hiccup just because he's the main character. You had reasons to support him and his struggle against the Dragon Riders. You know what I mean?
The Dragon Flyers, but sure. And the Dragon Hunters, but sure, not Riders.
What? You supported Hiccup and not the bad guy because you connected to Hiccup and not just because he's the main character. You know what I mean?
Sure.
That excuse. So that's one thing I really like about it. And yeah, you could argue that it a bit overstated its welcome. And I'm not the biggest fan of Race to the Edge 5, as people may remember, for various reasons. But overall, I did enjoy the show. I wasn't a big fan of it when it started, I Mildew, but it did grow on me as it went on. And I'm glad I got to see it. It did bridge the gap between the movies nicely. And I'm glad that it ended on a high note. That's my take on it.
Fair enough.
I think. Sorry.
Let's Voyager go.
No. Just one last quick thing, I guess. I think it was planned further ahead than I thought, particularly with the Netflix series. Just when Johan was revealed as a villain, I was like, oh great, look what they just pulled out of their hat now. But then I don't know if it was, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know if it was they were like, oh yeah, we wrote this in earlier, let's let that be proof that Johan's evil. But it made more sense than I initially thought it did, and I just want to give them credit for writing ahead further than I thought they had.
Yeah, they worked that out really well. Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
Yeah, there's actually a YouTube video which I saw a few days before the season premiered, which pretty much shows that maybe they planned for Johan to be the bad guys since the beginning, and by the beginning I mean writers.
Yeah, it's very possible.
I was going to point that out the first time that we... I'm sorry, I keep talking over you.
No, that's fine. We do it all the time. Feel free.
I was just going to... No.
All right, mediation time. Voyager goes first because she's never on the show anymore, so she needs her time to get it all out.
I'm so sorry.
I understand. It's okay.
But I was just going to say, I was reading back through, and I realized as I was reading through, the first episode we meet Johan is Dragonflower, where all of the dragons are poisoned because of the flowers he brings to the island. So it was just kind of coincidence, I think, not kind of thought along those lines there. But
Phoenix, right? Objection.
Of course. But what I want to say is that, if the writers did plan for Johan to be a bad guy since writers, kudos to them to actually getting to that point and actually, making it work. Because if they planned it since writers, they had to wait a lot of time in order to reveal this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So shall we move on to our favorite and least favorite things to come out of the show? Character, plot elements, whatever.
I went first last time, so... Oh, actually, no, Voyager did. So I guess I'll go first this time. I'm used to just going first. I don't know why. Although I'm appreciative that you went first for this one.
You have a booming voice. So
yes,
go ahead, be first.
Yeah, it is something that I've been told. So favorite and least favorite things. Wow. So it's easy to point out the least favorite things. Obviously, just the idea, the whole canon fights. Didn't really care much for those. And yes, they didn't do a very good job with a lot of things. But also, I think some people were just wanted to search for something because they were, I don't know, they just had issues with the show. So they were just like, well, try and explain this. So I really didn't care much for that. On the terms of favorite things, I do like, I'm always the Hickstrom fan. So I actually, despite how long it took, I'm very glad with how they ended it. And I'm also glad that they didn't overdo it. As much as people were scared about, they actually did it really well. I think in that sense. I really enjoy the dragons they had in there. Every new dragon was, aside from like a couple, they were all very interesting and had very incredible designs with them. So that's pretty much the short version. Because I don't want to steal anything else. Because I know I'm pretty sure I had some things that other people were going to say, and I don't want to say them.
Well, there are going to be nowadays, but hey, say what.
I'll just come back and say if I had them after you guys go. So
Okay. Voyager, you want to go next?
Sure. Least favorite, Mildew, just straight off.
Ooh.
I hate Mildew. I don't like. He wasn't even a likable villain. I found most villains in this series, even somewhat likable. They just had a quality about him that you're like, oh yeah, pretty cool guy. Okay, I'm so sorry I cursed. Mildew. No, Mildew.
Did you hear a villain episode where Wolf just went off on how good Mildew was as a villain?
He was a great villain.
Okay.
But he wasn't a likable one. He was a horrible. It was no.
Did you also notice his cameo? I pointed this out last week. Did you notice his cameo at the very end of?
I did, and I was surprised other people didn't notice it because it was pretty obvious in the top corner there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it was a very random appearance, because it's just like we need to put someone there.
It's probably just an Easter egg. It's not like you don't need to look into it. It's probably just an Easter egg, from what I thought at least.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest twist in the world will be if in How to Train Dragons 3 he will be the ultimate villain.
Yeah.
So I didn't like Mildew. I also didn't like Aaron Dagger being brother and sister, but it ended up working out well. But I'm still not entirely sold on how that happened. Things I liked. I loved the Vanaheim plot, just overarching. The dragons were awesome. The place is awesome. Oswald's story being wrapped up was very well done. I like that a lot. And honorable mentions to Throck and Vigo, I guess. Pretty neat.
Also, you're the person I want. You're the person I want a perspective on it. What do you think about Dagger and Mala?
I won't say that it makes sense, but I will say that I'm happy that Dagger didn't get an ending where he died, like literally all of the other villains. So there you go.
Okay, cool. Wolf, your turn.
Yeah, talking about, one, Mildew's great. Argue, but no. Like, I understand why many people don't like Mildew, and I completely get that. For me, something that I would say I didn't really enjoy as much from Race to the Edge specifically would be talking about kind of the Vanaheim plot and the entire thing with Oswald. I would say I didn't enjoy that as much, personally.
Because they sabotaged your spin-off idea?
Not really, though I'm sure that might have something to do with it. But no, it's just because, for me, when the show decided to say, like take for instance, right, when Fish Legs finally said goodbye to Heather, right? When Heather's like, yeah, I'm going to go off with my brother. Yeah, I agree, like the whole Dagger and Heather being brother and sister thing was a little bit weird, not entirely sure still if I think that completely works, but at the very least, it gave them a way to write Dagger and Heather off for, like if you wanted to link it to the second movie. And for me, I figured, hey, it makes a lot of sense if they just leave off to go find their father. The second Dagger mentions, hey, Oswald actually didn't die. I don't know where he's at. And it made a lot of sense for them to just kind of go off and do their own thing and not be there. And it kind of took away from Fish Legs having to say goodbye to Heather for her to just say, help, I'm back again, here to help. Hey, guys. Like, yeah, I like Heather. She's a fun character, and Dagger as well. But I think it would have been more interesting to see them gone.
Maybe so, but I think it's easier to argue that I mean, not easy, but you could say that since Dagger married Mala, they're now ruling that island, and Heather's left to take care of Berserk, which I think
Oh,
it's
sure.
good enough. It's yeah, they're
Oh,
busy.
sure. Like I don't like. There's nothing wrong with it. I just think it would have been different. Maybe more interesting. Maybe better. Like I'm not going to argue that it would have been better. Maybe more interesting, but it definitely would have been different, and I would have enjoyed seeing that. But I can't really complain too much with what I got because I still did enjoy it. If I want to talk about things that I really didn't like, and I just wish they wouldn't have done as much, would be the idea that almost every villain except for one really or two got a kind of, hey, we've turned good guys. And for some of them it did work, and I loved how they did Vigo saying, hey, I learned from you, and then kind of just going out in his own way. Like that was a great thing. I loved how they did that. And it was one of the times where they used the kind of villain somewhat turning good really well. But all the other ones, like Alvin, I enjoy Alvin's character. He was great. He was a lot of fun. But it was fine to see him turn good. Then they did it with Dagger, which again, love Dagger's character, but it started to get a little bit old. Then they did it, they tried to surprise us with doing it with Vigo and Riker maybe being good, but turning out they're not. And then they did it, with Vigo again, and it just kind of gets a little bit old. I'd rather see them done a little bit different stuff with the villains. I feel like they didn't change it up enough for how they ended their villains a lot of the times.
At least they actually died this time for once, as opposed to fake dying and coming
I mean,
back.
Honestly,
technically, Johan's still not dead though. You could always, he could always unthaw and come back.
Well, Riker is dead, so that's
The only one other than Vigo, who we fairly sure he's out. Though, again, how they ended that, you could technically maybe bring him back if depending on how you wanted to do things. But we're gonna say he's gone. We're gonna say Riker's gone officially, and Johan could unthaw, maybe.
I think Johan asphyxiated.
Could be that as well.
And Krogan is pretty much dead as well. I don't think Drago will keep him alive.
They literally brought back Jimon Hunsu for his voice actor. Of course, he's gonna die.
I do like the idea of Johan unthawing though, and continuing on with his dastardly evil plot.
Twisting
mustache twirls.
Yes, there it is. One thing that you brought up too, really quick though, that I just kind of, this has probably been said, but like that whole Dagger Mala plot and what you said with that was probably literally it feels like it's a last minute thing just so they can tie up loose ends with, oh hey, where did they go and why do Fish Legs and Snotlout fight over Rough Nut now? It's like because how do we do this? Oh, I have it. Mala and Dagger. Okay, keep going.
Heather's still single though.
I know, but like,
Mm-hmm.
but like you said, she has to rule Berserker Island.
Still single though.
Guys, we all know that Dagger and Mala's wedding was only there for us to have Hiccup and Astrid kissing in inappropriate moments, man.
Yeah, and to bring back Shadow Master. That too.
I was super disappointed that like the Dance of Blades, they didn't even make it like a thing where they like just kind of like did a courtship dance with swords. It was actually just on grass. I was thinking it would be totally cool and appropriate if they just both had swords while they were dancing, and that'd be nice and kind of interesting looking.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't do that at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So
one last thing, like I never talked about something the show did that I really enjoyed, and one of those things that the show did that I personally really thoroughly enjoyed was just Race to the Edges, getting away from Berk and just exploring the rest of the archipelago. It's one of those things that it had its faults and it wasn't perfect, but I loved the idea of expanding upon this world. The Defenders of the Wing, the Wing Maidens, all of that was interesting stuff. And while it has its faults here and there, I loved all just the exploration. I enjoyed that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to me, last favorite thing, well, like Voyager said, I never really liked Mildew, and and it kind of comes to the fact that it took me a few episodes to actually get into Riders of Berk. But I don't even know why. Maybe because I was maybe because I was, thinking back to the movie, I was expecting it to be in the same quality, and then I realized that, well, it's not necessarily the same thing. You'll have to adjust to a different format here. And I do like that it kind of gives, at least in Riders and Defenders, we got this like everyday life on Berk kind of routine. It help, to help develop the life and the lives of these people. And also, I like that they actually brought back a lot of not a lot, but most of the voice actors from the movies to the show. Like, Jay Baruchel, America Ferrera, all of these guys. It was good. It was good to have some of the original voices there. So, and then when you go into the second movie, these are the same voices for the most part, and and even the people who are not the originals are pretty good imitators. Like, I think Snotlout's voice actor, it's obviously not Jonah Hill, but it gets the job done. Also with Rafnot and Gabriel. Stuick, you could argue, doesn't sound the same, but it didn't bother me as much.
It's a shame I was in the market for being stoic.
In terms of characters, I like Delger. I like Ryder eventually. when she was in Riders, she was like, she's fine, whatever. But in Rest of the Edge, I actually really came to like her character. I liked Vigo for the fact that Hiccup had someone. I probably brought it out before that Hiccup had someone to go up against who had the same strength as him, brains, and them interacting with each other was always great. And what else? I like the entire Venaheim stuff as well. Overall, I just liked really exploring this world more and being in this world a lot more, because there are a lot of more possibilities with the show than with the movie in this case. And the fact that we got to see more people who treat dragons in different ways, like the Wind Maidens and the Razor Whips, flying with the Razor Whips babies, and then there are the Defenders of the Wing, who have one dragon and considered riding on one like an insult at one point. Just seeing this world and all these different beliefs. So I like that world building stuff, like Wolf said, because as big and wide you can make the movies, you wouldn't have time to meet all of these characters over the course of 3 movies.
It makes things feel more lived in and believable.
Yes, exactly.
I think they might have gotten a little stuck towards the end. Like, they kind of run out of budget to model new islands and stuff just to give them other places to go. But overall, yeah the exploration was great.
Yeah, and a lot of Hiccup and others in the Defenders of the Wing, as we established.
I don't know what you're talking about. They're just people who all wear masks.
Yeah, really. Like, what are you talking about?
You are the ones who brought it up.
You
to
have
me,
no
anyway. I have. It's in previous episodes. So, yeah, I just need to look for it now.
What is
But
this?
anyway, before we start pointing fingers at each other again, let's go with what is your favorite season?
Wait, hold on. Are we gonna ignore the obvious of what our favorite thing to come out of this show is?
Oh, chicken, obviously.
Are you guys not sentimental at all? Are you guys not cheesy, corny? This freaking podcast?
Well,
how dare
it's not
you
necessarily
insult
the
me.
show. It's the yeah, I can't really say connect us to the show all that much.
You just said the favorite thing to come out of the show. I mean, this podcast is a direct result of the show. I mean, it's of all of it, but like, I'm pretty sure you got the idea because of the TV show. It's like, hey, let's make a podcast. Clearly, we couldn't make a podcast off of 2 movies and 2 TV seasons.
Well, You know what? I'll say that much. If the entire franchise was just 2 movies, then yeah, this podcast will probably never be a thing. But I won't say it came from the show specifically. I knew there was going to, Serpent Cell was known to be a thing at the time, and there were also the shorts. So, but it is the majority of the reason why we keep doing this. And every big event we have was reviewing a season of the show almost. So yeah. Audience, what do you think? Did the Berkcast came from the show specifically? Let us know in the comments. But
I don't know if that's
Nice
a
call to
decision
action.
to make. Anyway,
So what is your favorite season or episode, if you have a specific event?
okay, now I can say I went first last time. So
I'll go last this time.
Yes, that means I
So,
get to go first.
yes.
Yeah,
So I guess I'll
go ahead.
say my favorite season still has to be Riders of Berk. Like I love Race to the Edge has a lot of good seasons in it. Defenders of Berk was okay, but Riders of Berk is still my favorite just because of it had that overarching theme and it did stick to it. And I just really enjoyed that personally.
Great.
Okay, your least favorite season?
Least favorite season, I still think I might say Defenders of Berk.
Okay.
Why?
Okay, so when you got to Race of the
Because Defenders of Berk,
like it's not going up, but it's not going down as well.
well, no, I think Race to the Edge, did again, like I said, I think Race to the Edge did a lot of good. It's just Riders of Berk had one, it had that
Did it
overarching
better.
theme that connected every episode. Race to the Edge didn't have that for me. It felt a little bit more episode of the week style, which is fine. Which there's nothing wrong with that. And it did have its, connecting plot lines, I guess you would say, that being the Dragon Eye and the Dragon Hunters and stopping them. But it did feel a bit more episode of the week, place of the week, dragon of the week kind of thing. And I enjoy those overarching themes and narratives a bit more that you kind of carry throughout a season and finally wrap up everything. And Riders of Berk really kind of had all of that in one package. And the reason I say Defenders of Berk is my least favorite is because it's the first time that they stepped away from doing that. And I feel like there's a lot of plot lines in Riders of Berk that Defenders of Berk never really just did anything with and kind of dropped. Mildew being one of those. And some of the ideas of the Outcasts being one of those. It's like, hey, we're kind of broaching the subject of the Outcast riding dragons, but we never go back to and touch on it. Hey, Mildew has all this knowledge of Berk, but we never really go back to and touch on that. And a few other things too. So saying that, I think one of my favorite lines of
that's what I was gonna say. It's
anything came from Defenders of Berk. So,
yeah,
it's not the leg, it's everything attached to it. Snotlout's line, that's one of my favorite lines, and that came from Defenders of Berk. So, shows how much of a hypocrite I am.
It's from the episode Defiant one, which is, I believe it is Defenders of Berk.
But what about the Trapper's Trap can trap the Trapper?
The Night in the
Also
Fury.
a great line.
That's also
Yeah.
in Defenders of Berk.
Yeah.
And that one is called back to a lot more than the other one. I guess the Trapper's Trap can trap the Trapper. Oh god, now I'm sounding like Dagger.
Actually, Defenders have
Actually,
one of my
no,
favorite-
Defiant one was Riders of Berk.
Okay. The Night in the Fury
Oh,
was Defenders, though. I do know
Yes.
Yeah.
So therefore, Wolf was wrong, and now he's not a hypocrite. And
that. Well, no, but that just backs his statement further that Riders is his favorite because his favorite line came from it.
yeah, exactly. That's also a thing. And if I may just say, is it my turn anyway? So
Yeah, it's your
maybe
turn.
I could just.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So quick segue. One of my favorite moments from the entire show is in the episode "The Night and the Fury," which is in Defenders, where Hiccup and Dagger have the little interaction in that forest, and then Hiccup reveals that he and Toothless are friends, and that he tamed the dragon, and the little fights they have with each other is cool. I like that. In terms of favorite season, I'll say, looking back at it, I'll say Race to the Edge season 4, because looking back at it, I think it was the season I enjoyed the most. Like, I didn't want to skip episodes. I didn't want to. Like, there was one which was, I could live without it, but overall, I just think that it was a great season all the way through. There was really little to no fluff, and even if there was fluff, it was good fluff, and I just like it was fun to see through, and you could just give me any random episode from this season to see at any random day, any random time, and I'll have a good time, and I'll have fun watching it. So I'll say Race to the Edge 4 is my favorite season. In terms of least favorite, what does it have to do with anything?
That was season 4.
Yeah, that was season 4. So it was a funny episode in season 4.
Gruff around the edges, though?
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about Gruff Knight.
You might have to if that's your least favorite season. Just saying.
Well, in terms of least favorite season, looking back, I kind of want to say Riders, but thinking about it more and more, I'm sorry to say it will be Race to the Edge 5. Like, it's not a bad season by any means. Like, let me say this, if any other show would have loved its weakest season to be in the same quality as Race to the Edge 5, but looking back, it's just the season that I felt most disappointed in. Like, you could tell they didn't plan for this season after season 4, and they just said, well, we got two new seasons, so, and this was like a season that they just used to keep plot elements alive and going, so that they won't have to write an entire new story for this. And like, Vigo being alive after not him being alive is the problem. The way they kept him alive was very like, well, he fell into a volcano, how can we fix that? I know, let's put a rock under there, stupid stuff like that kind of take away from it. And the fact that they never really seem to go anywhere with its plot. So I'll say Race to the Edge 5. Sorry.
All right. Fair enough. So for me, I really have a tough time choosing my favorite season. I really like to go for plot-related seasons, mostly because that's just kind of how I roll. For me, it seems like Race to the Edge Season 2 is probably the strongest in that sense, because it kicks off all of the whole Race to the Edge itself. Because if you look at all of Race to the Edge, not just starting at the beginning and then going on, the plot really revolves around the Dragon Hunters. And so this is when we first get to the Dragon Hunters. We get the introduction of Vigo, which I'll certainly talk about him later. And then it's just a lot. I mean, sure, there's actually quite a few filler episodes in this, but the amount of plot related to the Dragon Hunters and just the introduction of Vigo together is probably what makes this one of my favorite seasons. I mean, season 3 is also strong because I just like the how many change of settings you get in season 3 with, the Bufflord Soldier. I really loved the set design for Outpost Island, or Spitelout's Storehouse Island. That's what it is. Because I just like it. It's just so different. Even the grass was the darker green. They decided to change the freaking grass color, and that just stood out to me because they actually decided to do that. The trees are different. The grass is different. The whole feel is different because you introduce the dragon that's used later, granted. But Yeah, so anything it's obviously between, plot related or world building related. So I think in the end I'll choose season 2, mostly because of that whole the overarching plot introduction. And for least favorite, I think I'll have to go with HC on season 5. For most of the similar reasons. Yeah, like I mean, it's between that or, as Wolf said, Defenders of Berk, because you know it's the same kind of idea. They don't know what they like. They kind of lose sight of what they're doing. Or in HC's case, he was right. Oh, we got renewed for a season. Maybe they have that overarching plot, but they need to push it back. Well, then how do they fill it with that extra season? They just kind of tie it together with some loosely fashioned episodes. Yeah, and so that's kind of where I stand. I think I'll stick with season 5 as my least favorite of Race to the Edge, and season 2 of Race to the Edge is my favorite.
Good season, I have to say. Like, if not for fall, season 2 will be my favorite as well. Anyway, Voyager, your turn.
All right, get ready for some controversy. My favorite season is Defenders of Berk. I think it's easy to critique because it's very long. It's like 20 episodes long.
So is
Sorry, Whip. Yeah.
I was saying fight.
Oh, fight. Let's go. But like, I think it's easy to critique because it's long, and anything that is this long, there kind of has to be filler. If there's 20 episodes of plot, you're gonna have a really hard time coming up with that much to cover and talk about. And I think that's where some of that critique can come from. Also, I have to admit I haven't rewatched Defenders in a while, but it comes from a place of nostalgia of me saying it's my favorite. It has the arc of my favorite villain in the entire show, so there's one thing. I loved this girl. I think it was one of the first times that we saw Hiccup with a dragon that he couldn't train. And I think that was really interesting to see our hero kind of fail in a sense that he doesn't always get the dragon. There's times when he has to do something else to protect people or protect other dragons, which is pretty interesting. There was an intervillain plot. You've got Alvin and Dagger. You also have Mildew at the very beginning there. And also, I really enjoyed a lot of the dragon designs that they introduced in this season. I think it's got my favorite designs. We get the introduction to Gronkle Iron, which they use, I think, for the entire rest of the show, right? Also, Changewing is probably my favorite dragon. So Defenders gets more points for introducing it there. So yeah, overall, I think it's more than I know it to be my favorite season. I remember it to be the season that I enjoyed episode by episode the most. And yeah, that's about what I got for Defenders of Berk, but I'm sticking to it.
That's completely understandable. Like, yeah, when I say Defenders of Berk is my least favorite, I don't mean that I don't mean that in that it's bad. I mean that, some of the stuff there I didn't enjoy as much as I did from other seasons, but there's still a ton of good stuff I feel in Defenders of Berk, and you just mentioned a lot of that good stuff too.
I think it's hard to say the Dragons had a terrible season though. So anything that we think is the worst season is still a good season.
Terms, it's not bad. It's what's the weakest in your opinion? Like, they're all strong in their own respects, but it's just I don't think any of us will say there's been a horrible or bad. It's just, again, on that spectrum I mentioned earlier, there's nothing really on that 50-50 mark, but there's some that are close, depending on who you ask. But like, there's nothing that's on the bad side.
Like I said before, we talked about Race to the Edge 5. When I say it's the weakest, one, it doesn't mean it's bad, and two, there are some other shows that wished their best seasons would be like the season we deemed our least favorite in this show.
Very true.
But Voyager, you said your favorite season. What's your least favorite?
My least favorite is Race to the Edge season 1, kind of leading into season 2. Besides discovering the Dragon Eye, I think it was like 100% filler. It was really just trying to lead up to Vigo and Riker. It was just like, what can we do to drop subtle hints that lead us kind of nowhere while Dagger just does his thing off in a corner. And I think one of the things that makes it so weak is I've never been able to go back and confirm this for sure. I feel like they changed Dagger's dialogue style for Race to the Edge, and I don't know why. He never really recovered from it, whatever they changed. It was just odd, and it made him a weaker villain because of the way they wrote him. Also, he never won a fight against Hiccup, and so it became really boring to like be like, oh look, here's Dagger again. Can't wait to destroy his ships again, kind of thing. So we never got anything new, and we never really advanced that far in an episode until we actually meet Vigo and Riker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of agree with this. The Race to the Edge one started well, but it didn't end on, it didn't really end on a high note. I kind of agree. Anyway, so, there are two bunch of characters in this show to me. The characters which came from the movies and the characters which were created for the show. So, which character from the movie was your favorite, and which character created for the show was your favorite?
HC, you're the only one who hasn't gone first.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start. Why not? Anyway, in terms of character which came from the movie, I'm making up a rule here. Let's foul Hiccup here because it's kind of unfair, really. He's the main character. So we can't...
No, I mean, if you want to talk about it, talk about it.
He wasn't even my first choice, don't worry.
Okay, but for the sake of keeping it interesting, I'm disqualifying Hiccup because he's the main character of the movies as well. So we already go in with a little bit of bias, I guess, because we know him more from the movie. But... So here's the thing. If we're disqualifying Hiccup, I'll probably say Snotlout because he had
I have a feeling that's going to be a common thread.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Oh my god, is it all Snotlout?
Well, yeah.
Is everybody Snotlout?
Everybody
Oh my god.
I will come up with something different. Continue on.
Yeah, but I'll say in terms of my opinion, out of the characters which came from the movies, he's the only one I think who got the most interesting character development parts, and also got the funnier moments, the changing he had a lot going on with him in terms of arcs, and Fish Legs had the same arc over and over again, like we established many times.
Yeah, HC and I really went off on that.
And while the twins are funny in a lot of instances, there are some points where especially if you binge a season, they could really get on the nose every once in a while. Snotlout, I had one episode which I didn't really like him in, and considering there are more than 100 episodes, the fact that I can only name one, maybe two episodes where he annoyed me, and the rest I was fine with him, that pretty much means something. The only thing I'll say that and also the voice actor does a very good job in the show. The Jonah Hill fan in me kind of wanted him to reprise the role, but I'm not complaining. The guy from the show does a fantastic job, and also he wrote a book. That was amazing in itself, and I'll buy that book, like I said. So that's for a character from the movie. A character created for yeah. Hashtag contact me. But anyway, for a character created for the show, that's my favorite. That's actually hard. I want to say V but at the same time, you know what? Yeah, I'll say Vigo just because created, when he first appeared, he was kind of a different thing. He was a different type of villain and the character because like I said, we never really had a character which matched Hiccup's brains, and it was interesting to see that finally explode. And I also like that just because he was smart, he wasn't really showing off to Hiccup. He actually admired having a challenge and a competition. And the way his dialogue is written, the way Alfred Manila says his lines, like this this character was just interesting in everything he did. Like the way he survived the volcano is a bit laughable, if you ask me. But other than that, I just really like Vigo, so he'll be my favorite from the show specifically.
Fair enough.
Who next?
I guess I'll go next. Yeah. So, like, like we all pointed out, Snotlout for me, definitely one of the from the movies. And I think it's just because in Riders of Berk, let's put it this way: in Riders of Berk, they really kept up that bully trope, so it was kind of annoying. Until we get to that point of it's not the leg, it's everything attached to it. That's when they really start to get his character going. You kind of don't see it as much in Defenders of Berk, but then we get to Race to the Edge, and they just they knew it's like they knew where they wanted to take him, and they just knew how to write him so well. How any interaction he had with the other writers, mainly Hiccup, I could go on and on about how anytime there's a Hiccup and Snotlout point in an episode, it's gonna be a really good one, because they work so well together in terms of writing purposes, in terms of plot purposes, and just in their personalities. You may say sometimes they don't write Hiccup the way he should have been, but anytime that it's Hiccup and Snotlout together, they seem to get it correct. And just any time that there's been Snotlout through his own character development has been great too. Even in the end, of season 6, we get that point where we go back to Wingmaiden Island when we have the last thing that they really need to develop on the Snotlout character, his interaction with women, which he still has that womanizer in him, but he's dealing with Minden, and he literally fourth wall breaks and says, or not really fourth wall breaks, but he just says, don't listen to me. I've done this before. I'm an idiot, right? But he's also kind of telling her to listen to him at the same time because he's done it before. He knows his own character, and I think that's really great on how they've developed him.
Yeah.
New character created for the show. I mean, I'm not going to be here and there. I'm just flat out saying Vigo. Mostly for the same reasons, He was probably the best villain I've seen written in a long time in an animated show. Probably the best villain overall. It's really hard to find another villain that was first off introduced so strongly. Secondly, kept going in such a way, and despite what some people say about how how he acted, I really think that they fleshed out the idea that he was just a businessman. And so some people argued, why would he do that? That's not what a villain would do. But he consistently stated that he was a businessman, and I really like that they kind of kept that idea going with him too. How it was always about business, until season 5 and 6 when it was kind of about revenge or to stop the Dragon Riders completely. But I really like it how they took Vigo's character in the end. So that's me.
Okay, Voyager, you want to go next?
Sure. Characters from the movies has to be Snotlout, of course. I agree with everything that you guys said. I think, the Wing Maidens episode it just hit the nail on the head, really. It made you, think, oh my goodness, look at how far this character's come. He kind of went from being the bully to being the butt of the joke to realizing what he needs to do to be a respected part of the group and what he needs to contribute as a friend and as a fellow, what are the dragon riders? And also, he got the funniest moments in the show ever for me. I think searching for Oswald and Chicken, I was just trying not to die laughing the entire time. Anytime he came up, I was so ready for the next little plot point that he was going to explain. Honestly, yeah, he ended up being my favorite one from the movies.
Snotlout's book.
That was great too.
But what? I don't think the book was better than Searching for Oswald and Chicken.
Oh
but
no,
it
but I
was still
think the
pretty
book,
good.
his
also a
book
good
was just
point.
a great moment, though. But yeah,
It was funnier to me, mostly because I don't know if you watched the episode last week, Voyager. Granted, it was also 2 hours and I think 14 minutes. It was really long, but my viewing of
20 minutes.
Race to the Edge season 6 was a drinking game with somebody on the Discord server. And basically, when we got to that point, we were just, first off, that was late in the season, so we had already had a few by then. But we were also just spewing off extra chapters that he could write, and they were very, very vulgar, but very funny. So we were just like, oh, what's the next chapter he could come up with? And so that's why I think I found it funnier at the time. But you're absolutely right.
I mean, it's still amazing, but yeah.
So, Voyager, I think we all know the answer, but who's your favorite character created for the show?
Well, if I didn't say Dagger, would everybody be disappointed? I mean,
no, because I think people expect a certain answer from me, and I think they'll be interested to hear what I have to say. So,
Hey,
well, I mean,
here's the
it's
thing. I mind on you saying Dagger. So, no, I'm kidding.
it does have to be Dagger though, just 'cause I don't know, why not? If you're curious as for a reason as to why it's not Vigo, I feel like Vigo he ended up being a little too obvious, and it's a hard thing to explain the way I feel about it. I love his ending. Triple Cross is my favorite episode in the entire show, but overall, it just kind of became like oh, look at this really difficult villain. He's just smart, like really, really smart, and I wonder how Hiccup will defeat him. And it felt like it was like it ended up kind of making a joke out of itself almost, where it was just kind of like, yeah, he's smart. He's going to come up with something and trick Hiccup, and somehow I just kind of saw through the whole thing, and it didn't get me really, and I mean that's why it's not Vigo.
would you say that he wasn't a villain who could really stand out on his own and really had what you would call or consider a really standout quality to him, other than he was just smart?
Yeah, I think that's probably what it is. I think he was just, other than that, he was just a little bit quiet. And there's nothing wrong with the character that does dealings in the background, but like for him to be a main villain for a pretty long time, you just kind of tend to see where it's going. You're like, oh yeah, well he's gonna trick Hiccup again.
So I guess the reason why Dagger doesn't fit that bill is because he's deranged and you don't know where he's going.
Well, I mean, he stands out. He's very boisterous about himself, and to everyone really.
Well, the thing is, I think
And
Vigo is the first villain that we get that's somewhat normal, right? Like, we have Dagger the Deranged, Alvin the Treacherous, who's a mountain of a man, and Mildew, who's an old, ugly man who hates dragons. Like, it's the standout is that he's actually not your weird character.
I'm sorry, Vigo is not bold.
I didn't say he was bold.
You said, or am I mishearing things?
You may be mishearing things. Anyway.
You're getting old, HC. Enjoy. Welcome to my world.
Well, I think I'm the second oldest here, so yeah, I'm treading you.
You are.
But anyway, so Voyager, we know it's Dagger, but and we know why, but can you maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I felt like talking about Vigo for a little bit because he was getting a little bit too much praise, from my opinion. But anyway, Dagger, number one, it has to be him. How many times have I talked about this character? It might come, like I said, for Defenders of Berk, kind of from a place of nostalgia. But honestly, I think he was a pretty awesome villain in Riders and Defenders. I had never really seen a series before where they went with an actual insane person as a villain, which was pretty cool. I thought in Riders and Defenders his dialogue was genuinely funny and unexpected, and it was just kind of a joy to see what that character would do. In my opinion, he took a huge nosedive season 1. I don't think any of us knew why he was there and still in the show. I feel like it would have been a great place to end him if they had just said, "Yep, we're taking him to jail," and at the end of Defenders, and that was it. Because to be honest, he didn't end up contributing a whole lot to the plot at the end of the Netflix series. But overall, they worked it out. It was a rough road to get him to his redemption arc. They got him there. I'm glad that since he's my favorite, he didn't die. Like I said, I'm kind of neutral on his ending. But overall, I think they still I don't know.
He was just my favorite on the show, by the way, for the end of season 4, right? Because of Dagger's quote unquote end at that point. Weren't you on for that?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think so. And I think I said then I hope it is because he's yeah, but he did anyway. I don't know. They've had a hard time killing off anybody in this show, but yeah. So without having a specific reason for why he's still my favorite, he certainly was in Riders and Defenders. My only thing is they should have updated his model at least once. Like the orange scruff on the front of his face during the entire Netflix series bothered me. The fact that his arms reach past his knees bothers me. Like every time I see him, I just feel like I just have to ask what is this abomination? Why did they not fix anything? But other than that, still my favorite boy.
Don't you know, any character that's up in front has to be super short and out of proportion. Otherwise, they just look like a background character that's actually normal sized in any animated TV show ever. Why can't they have tall people?
No, they could have at least just fixed his arms. Like, just fix his arms, and that would fix about 80% of your problems. Like, oh my god.
I will say, as far as voice actors go, Dagger's voice actor is probably one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know why, but when Voyager said fix his arms, for some reason I can just see Dagger as a Rayman character, with no arms and no legs.
Just
and
the
no
hands, right?
That would be amazing.
Voyager, I'm waiting for one of your famous edits with him with shorter arms.
Yeah.
I mean, I might. Are they famous?
Body.
Since when?
I don't know. I've always remembered you doing edits back in the day.
Yeah, I was kind of trying to see what I could do with Photoshop, but I'm a little bit better at it now. Maybe I will.
Awesome. Well, Wolf, time to choose not Snotlout and your show character who nobody knows because you're a fence sitter.
So, I was going to point out how common of a thread this was. I was going to talk about Snotlout as well, and about how I really enjoyed his character writing from the show, that it was just really well done. But to give the show credit for something else, and because I love to break HC's rules, I'm going to say I really enjoyed Stoic and Hiccup's relationship and how the show went into that.
So, because I disqualified Hiccup, you need to say Stoic. So say Stoic.
No, I'm saying Stoic and Hiccup's relationship because it does involve Hiccup. But I will say I enjoyed, but looking at it from Stoic's perspective, I do enjoy how the show wrote him, and I do enjoy that they went into more of, Stoic and Hiccup being father and son, and how they expanded on that a little bit. It wasn't always perfect, but they did have a lot of good moments, I felt, that delved into it more than maybe what the movies have always been able to. And you really get a sense for more of how they've grown since the first movie and how they've come to recognize one another. So I really enjoyed that.
Okay. Interesting.
Now,
Wait,
looking
let's
at
assume I don't know.
do it.
Let's assume I personally don't know who it is, and let's assume everyone don't know who it is.
Well, I
The
think I'm
stage
gonna
is yours.
I think I'm gonna surprise you with my favorite show character. You know, I do,
Is it Mildew?
I do enjoy Mildew. I like him as a villain, and I thought he was really well done as a villain, and I love the arc that he had. So I do have to mention him, but I'm going to say that a character that I really enjoyed and would love to see more of,
Alvin.
and it's no,
Damn.
and that I would love to see that we didn't get a lot
Throg.
of would be Throg's also great, but no, I was going to talk about Atali.
Oh,
I really enjoyed Atali and from the Wing Maidens.
that okay? You did surprise.
Yeah,
Somebody who had
no,
no
no, no,
idea.
no, wait, totally, totally called that. I'm not surprised at all. Yeah, okay, to be honest for a second, I was sure you were going to say Savage, but I was.
I could.
Oh yeah, Wolf, your favorite thing to come out of the show. How dare you forget about your favorite ship? The boot.
I love how I don't have to mention it anymore. You'll mention it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
But
His ship.
yeah,
Okay, but Atali,
and I will mention like how Heather started to grow on me because of Race to the Edge, and Dagger was always great too. Have to mention those two characters, but yeah, Atali, I like the design of the Wing Maidens, how the show decided to forego masks for some of them, and we saw that there was differences in the designs for some of the characters, and I really enjoyed Atali's how she approached leadership, and seeing a little bit of her was interesting. Seeing the designs of the characters from the Wing Maidens were interesting, and I would love to see more of that character and more of the Wing Maidens. So Atali for me was just an interesting idea that I would love to explore more. A fun character. And what I feel one
241.
and I feel one that has a decent amount of potential depending on where you go with her and what you do.
There you go.
Okay. Roger, want to say anything?
I was just thinking about it. It's hard because they didn't really explore the Wing Maidens much, did they?
Mm. We found we learned quite a bit more about. Go ahead.
I was gonna say we finally get like a female-centric clan. Awesome, but what do they do with them? Oh, they fly like fairies, and then they're gone. But then they come back. But then they're gone again.
Please, they know who knows someone who knows Volca.
Yeah, exactly. That too. That's the other. How do we get the wildebeest egg to Valka? Let's create a completely weird island of females that knows somebody who knows Valka. All right, let's build it.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of which, people said they wouldn't mind the show bridging How to Train Dragon 2 and 3, and just recently there's rumors starting popping out about something called Dragons Rescue Riders or something like that. So what are your thoughts on that?
I hate that name.
Yeah, first off.
I enjoy that name
This isn't the
just
rescue.
because there's so much potential for what is essentially a catchy theme tune a la old DuckTales or Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers or Spin Tales. Like there's so much potential for just catchy theme tunes that will get stuck in your head and never leave, and we need another show that has that again.
Yeah, Wolf, wait a minute. What is? Don't you mean Tailspin instead of Spin Tails?
Yes, Tailspin. I apologize.
I was like, what the hell is Spin Tails? Oh, okay.
Or Darkwing Duck, even.
Yeah.
We need another show with a really catchy and good theme tune. DreamWorks, this is your chance. You've already done it with King Julian, so I know you can do it.
Yeah. Okay, so with the exception of the Rescue Riders, what do you think about the show Bridging How to Train Dragon 2 and 3? Me personally, if a show like that ever existed, then one, we would probably hear about it by this point in time, and second, we kind of have the graphic novels to take care of that gap. And yeah, I know people some prefer, you know, a show rather than a graphic novel, but you know, I like it that the show has its own timeline and the graphic novels have their own timeline. So I'm cool with what we have, and I don't really want anything to be set chronologically before 3 and come out after 3. Like if something comes out after How to Train Dragon 3, and it still focuses on that big story, it just won't do it for me because, you know,
You would feel off.
obviously.
Yeah, for one, it would feel off too. I don't think that if this Rescue Riders is a thing, I think it's going to be a spin-off completely. It's not going to have to do anything with Hiccup. I mean, it's going to have obviously the whole dragon part of it.
It's going to be the B Team Riders. It's going to be It's going to be Gustav.
Yeah,
It's going to be a
Yes.
Gustav-centric TV show.
Oh, God.
Gustav is the
You know-
focus. That'd be so great.
Oh,
Rocknut's going to join them. It's going to be so enjoyable. Everyone's going to love it.
Character ever. Anyway.
Ghosty can be the comic relief.
Oh, God.
Yes.
Then we can see where she gets all her terrors from before
As
the second
long-
movie. If it's in that timeline. But, yeah, so I don't think... So for bridging How to Train Dragon 2 and 3, absolutely not. I'm fine with just the graphic novels. And based off the fact that, you know, I'm pretty sure at some point Dean said that, like, 3 is going to be pretty close in timeline sense to 2, with the exception of the graphic novels. But, yeah, so I'm not a fan of the bridging the second and third movies with a show.
Mhm. Okay.
I agree. And I think, like, the only thing that would help me accept it or even probably really look forward to watching it if they do something like this is if they actually take that step to mature it a little bit, lean a little more towards 2 in terms of plotline, in terms of, you know, how kind of quote unquote dark you're willing to go. One thing that I would be really sad to see, and I've been kind of joking about it the entire time, but I really wouldn't want to see all of the second movie's beautiful assets put in TV show texture land. Like, that would just make me really sad because
Yeah.
people work so hard to make all of these effects look so good, and even the grass and the textures and the world that they made for the second movie is so beautiful. It's just never going to compare visually, and it'd be hard to find a place to put a show that bridging 2 and 3 that has more of 2 themes, because it edges on not being for kids, and so that then it goes to, like, where would you air it? Would it still be Netflix? Would you try to put it on a network? It kind of becomes hard. So I agree with the graphic novel thing.
And Voyager took the words right out of my mouth somewhat. I was also going to say, like, the only way I could see them doing it that would really appeal to me at this point would be if they did mature it up and go for the more darker themes than what they did within Race to the Edge and Riders of Berk and Dragons of Berk, and really delve into that, you know, more.
Which you can't
that's-
do with...
Oh, yeah,
Netflix,
absolutely,
thank
you can
God,
do.
Netflix, you can do that.
I mean, they could probably do it with other networks too, but I mean, they could do that in general, and they could definitely make that work. But at the same time, like, that's probably the only thing that would really sell me on a show idea between the second and third movie, is for them to really mature things up and really take a closer look at different themes and ideas that they didn't go over with the show as of now.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm. Because the thing I keep
Okay.
going back to, I'm sorry, the thing I keep going back to is just that even my favorite character, I kind of struggled to give him redeeming qualities towards the end of the Netflix show, just because I have grown so much. I've explored so many other TV shows and genres and things like that that it just hasn't kind of stuck with me in terms of age. And that would probably be, like you said, my biggest selling point, just that it needs to grow up.
Mhm.
That's just funny. It's like you're talking to the show. Just grow up, will you?
Show some blood with those arrows.
I don't know.
Yeah, Dagger is a freaking arrow. I will say, I liked it. They did actually surprise me in some senses. For one, when the arrows sticking out of people, that was surprising. But then I think the most surprising to me was when Hiccup pulled the arrow out of Toothless. Like, there was actually, it wasn't blood, but you could actually see the arrow wound. And then that was probably like the most graphic. Granted, it wasn't that graphic at all, but it was the most graphic thing I'd seen then knew. And then you go, the later season when Garf is all screwed up, those are like pink cuts, but so they're not as like weird. And those are more like texture. Those are more like just an overlaid texture. They're not actual depth in the model, because like the cut from Toothless in his tail was pretty. It looked like an actual cut from the arrow. And I like that.
Yeah, it is worth pointing out, right? Because we brought this up a few times. When we say growing up, right, it doesn't necessarily, and being, and touching on more, deeper themes and more mature and potentially more mature themes, we don't necessarily mean that as a bad thing, and we don't necessarily mean if you don't do that, if your show doesn't do that, it's terrible. And it's not necessarily if your show does do that, it's a good thing, because ultimately, it's worth remembering growing up isn't necessarily an important thing. You don't have to, as you grow older, you learn that it's okay to like childish things, that it's perfectly acceptable to enjoy childish things. There's nothing wrong with that. But it is enjoyable to see something you love and enjoy touch on deeper themes. Like, it would have been interesting to see the show delve into maybe Hiccup, thinking back on his leg and how he lost it, and seeing him kind of still cope with that a little bit. It would have been interesting to see them maybe touch deeper on different relationship issues that Hiccup and Astrid might have. Different things like that. It's interesting to see, and it's enjoyable to see, because it gives you a much different perspective and outlook on something.
And the reason I keep bringing it up is just because I'm just because they have to realize that by now their audience has grown up by at least 6 years. So it's not like coming out of it nowhere, just like, let's make this kid show for adults. It's like the kids are adults now.
Yeah, but then again, you also, when you need to take into consideration when you are saying let's age this up, you need to also take into account that the grown-up kids are there, but then younger kids are starting to find out the show. So you need to also take into consideration that younger kids, kind of like us older people, watch it with all the quote unquote kiddie stuff in it. The kids are going to see all the quote-unquote adult stuff in it. So it's kind of a network consideration on if they want to take that risk. But I know what you mean. I wouldn't mind seeing like a darker tone to the show, to the same point. I'm not sure if to the same point of the second movie, but yeah. I will say it has a bit of a darker tone than a lot of modern cartoons. Like, there are modern cartoons which are dark. Like, it's not the Nickelodeon Ninja Turtles in any way, shape, or form, but like there are modern.
Well, to give a good example, right? Adventure Time has an episode where it explores the idea of, if I'm not mistaken, it's Alzheimer's. Right, with the vampire girl and the
Marceline
Ice King, Marceline. Like, they actually explored that theme in a way that's appropriate for kids and what that could mean to them. And it would be interesting to see the show maybe not explore that specific theme, but things like that, in a way that's interesting to kids, but still, if you actually look at it, is fairly deep and meaningful and can give you a really interesting perspective on things.
They did sort of explore. I mean, granted, we know what happens in How to Train Your Dragon 2 with Stoic's death, but they sort of did explore the concept of death in there. One thing, going back to Adventure Time, there's a mini movie, a grouping that they call, like, they do this a lot in modern TV shows, but they call it, like, with Steven Universe, they have just these called the series. So like in Adventure Time, excuse me, they had what was called the Islands series, and it was basically Finn actually finding where he came from, and that series messed me up. It was so sad. Like, wow, that was probably one of the most intense things I've ever seen for a kids show. And it's funny because, you know, Adventure Time is so much filler, but also so much plot that you're not really ready for this, because you'll go from one episode where they're fighting some weird monster to this stuff. And so yeah, they really have these super mature themes that sometimes they handle well, but sometimes they don't. And then, you know, it's just sometimes you don't want to ask for it. Like it's like, okay, you want to explore more mature themes, let's do it. So yes, you do want you do want Race to the Edge. We could have wanted them to tackle it, but do we want it to do it in a certain way, or do we want them to do just flat out, hey, somebody actually dies, let's see how they handle it?
Well, it's not so much that. I think it's seeing them try to broach the subject and where they go with it. You know, not everything's going to be a hit. You're going to have failures. Even, you know, Avatar: The Last Airbender, a show that I would say explores a lot of those, you know, somewhat deeper and darker themes, doesn't succeed at every episode. It does have its faults. But it's interesting to still see them try to do it. And especially considering this is a world that we all love and enjoy, it'd be interesting to see them try to do it.
I think a show that has a good balance right now is Trollhunters. Honestly, that show is excellent.
That's great.
I would agree.
Yeah,
DreamWorks just at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's another one of a DreamWorks production that has it there. It has the things for the kids, but it also tackles those themes in such a wonderful way that it ties in very well. You're like, yes, I'd let my 8-year-old watch this, but also I'll sit here and enjoy it as well. It's just an excellent show, and I love it. And it's a great example of how to tackle mature things in a kid-friendly way.
Yeah, I already brought up Nickelodeon's 2012 TMNT.
There's also another show that comes to mind real quick.
I'm trying to think.
Is the 2000 Teen Titans. That one was a great mix of drama and comedy as well, exploring very, very, sometimes really heavy material.
Yeah. Just to make sure,
this has been a great segue. Yeah, I was getting ready to say the same thing. This has been a great segue into the next question you were going to bring up, which was, were there any other things we wanted the show to tackle, but it didn't?
I thought we were on that topic, to be honest. We've been talking it for so long.
But Wolf is probably going to say something, and I agree with him. I did want that episode from the Dragon's point of view.
Yes, would have been nice to have gotten, but we didn't.
Yeah.
You know what? How I would want that. There was an episode. I think it was in the first season of the Pokemon anime.
Yep. I know exactly which one you're talking about.
So there was an episode where the Pokemon get lost, and you actually get subtitles as to what they're saying. I would love an episode like that with the dragons, but
there was also,
sadly not the.
If you guys, speaking of Pokemon, and first, if I remember correctly, the Mewtwo movie for Pokemon, they had a small episode before of the Pokemon going to like a little camp or something, and it just showed like their whole day there as well.
Yep.
No subtitles, but yeah, so
it was just a fun little animation thing, short
exactly.
for that movie.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a good point.
My God, I'm old, but. Yeah, anything else you wanted the show to tackle, with the exception of tone or the dragon, your point of view episode? Anything else? I can't really think of anything.
I feel like they put a pretty nice bow on the end of it with the last episode. So it would really only be kind of general overarching things that could be improved, like the maturity factor.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, there's, there's not a lot the show didn't really kind of do that I would say like, oh, it would have been so great if they did this. I think I could say it would have been great if the show did a little bit more with like the twins instead of them just being comedic relief. It would be, and they did do some of that, but there wasn't a ton. And it would have been more. It would have been enjoyable to see a bit more of that. It would have been enjoyable to see, a bit more to say Fishleg's character as well, and it would have really been enjoyable to see them do a lot more with Astrid. But they did start to do that as well closer to the end. So again, like the show definitely hit on a lot of stuff that I felt, all right, I'm happy more or less with what you're doing here, and I can't complain too much. Like you've touched on, at least to some degree, a lot of the things I would expect you to kind of touch on and go over.
Okay, so next up is, do you think this show turned out better than other movie-based shows? And I personally, when I thought over this, when I thought about it, I did come to the conclusion that, like, considering other movie-based shows I've seen, not necessarily DreamWorks, other stuff as well, this is probably the only show based on a movie that tries, if it succeeds or not, you'd be the judge, but that it actually tries to be a part of the movie's canon. Like if you take for example the Kung Fu Panda show, they say that it takes place between the first movie and the second movie, but it doesn't really add anything to the overall plot. Same with Penguins of Madagascar, which is an alternate universe in the worlds of the executive producers, not mine. I'm trying to think about something else, like
ironically,
Wolf mentioned Wolf mentioned Tailspin not too long ago. That's also a different universe to the Jungle Book. So
Clone Wars.
So that doesn't connect. That's the one thing I wasn't sure about. Is any of the Star Wars TV shows canonical?
Clone Wars is technically no longer. Clone Wars is technically no longer canon, but at the time, yes, it was considered and was canon. Until Disney came out and said that everything up to a certain point is no longer canon, I think Clone Wars was included in the no longer canon thing because it touched on the extended universe stuff, and they said anything in the extended universe is not canon.
That's dumb.
And I think Clone Wars falls into that, unfortunately. Now, Star Wars Rebels is a different story. It is canon, but I haven't seen Star Wars Rebels, but I've heard good stuff, but I can't say anything personally. But if I'm not mistaken, Clone Wars is no longer canon. Technically. Depending on how you want to look at it and if you want to agree with Disney or not.
The longer we go, the more unsure we are.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and speaking of Disney, again, thinking about other shows they did based on movies, like one show that I remember really liking as a kid is the Timon and Pumbaa TV show. But you can tell me with a straight face that it's canonical to the Lion King. Like once you put humans in there, you threw the canonicity out the window.
Well, let's just stop talking about the whole idea of canon, because for one, we're gonna have a lot of people that are gonna say, "Oh, Race to the Edge wasn't canon," even though they said it was. Because really, the question is, how did it turn out better? How did it turn out compared to other movie-based shows? We're not saying canon-based shows. We're talking
quality-wise.
I'm not done. Let me finish this.
I know, but you keep talking about canon. It's really distracting from the question.
Yeah, but like I said, like one of the things I admire about this is that whether you see it as canon or not, that's not the point. The point is they tried, and I commend them for trying, because let's say this. Let's assume I'm introducing a friend of mine to the franchise. And I tell them, you know what, you want to watch this in chronological order, then watch the first one, and then the show, then the second movie. So when he comes to the big dramatic moment of the second movie, which is Toothless killing Stuick, then like you can watch this scene with just the first movie in your mind, and it will still shock you, and it will still make you feel sad. But imagine having the entire baggage of the first movie, the shorts, and all of these seasons under your belt, and you get to this scene. This just became a lot more. This just had a lot more of an impact, I think.
It would be
So I
interesting to
admire
see
that about.
someone watch that part of the show and then go into the second movie, and see that and how they reacted to it. It would be interesting to see and hear their thoughts on it afterwards and how they felt about it.
So in terms of this, I think I commend them for trying, and I think it's a worthy effort, and that's why I think it is a bit better conceived than other TV shows based on movies. Okay, I'm done. I got my point across. Go ahead.
I think this one was among on all of the, like, you have to consider a lot of things on many different fronts. I already kind of gave my point on canon versus non-canon, so I don't think that should ever be considered a point when it comes to movie-based shows. For one, I'm considered longevity. This one has run a long time. Two, just the amount of content it's given us, which you can relate to time, but you can also say that some TV shows that go on long really do a lot of nothing. Hence, even though this isn't based off a movie, SpongeBob, like we said earlier, does a lot of nothing.
Simpsons would also be a good example.
Yeah, so...
Well, but that's a different genre, though.
I know. I was just saying that there are still TV shows that may be based off movies, but they do a lot of nothing, really. So that's kind of where I'm going versus the longevity versus content idea. Anyway, and then the other reason why I say content and longevity is because I've heard good things about the new Tangled series, but I haven't watched it. But that's only been out for like a year now. So so people might say, oh, hey, it's been a critical hit, so it's much better than the Race to the Edge. But you're like, well, hold on. That's just because Race to the Edge has had more time to. Ideally, it's had more time to screw up. Let's be honest. So if you have enough time, you will screw up.
Yeah. You know what? I'll say this as someone who watched the Tangled show and really like it. I'll say that the first season of Tangled is better than Riders, but taking the entire, if you'd ask me to compare it to other seasons, though, then yeah, Dragons will be better. But then again, I do like but then again, Tangled does have this feeling that it has an overarching plot, but it's mostly filler. Good filler, but filler nonetheless.
So anyway, like you said, it's only on its second season, or is it still on its first?
It just ended the first season, and second season is supposed to premiere sometime this year. Not sure when.
Okay, so content, longevity, and then what else I was gonna say? I guess just how interesting it is. So for one, despite what people may think, Race to the Edge has a plot, but how we got off with the Timon and Pumbaa, it was just a bunch of, it's just, the whole point of it is to be silly. There's never ever, or even with Penguins of Madagascar, there's never a solid plot that continues from episode to episode. Sure, they might have a two-parter or something that relates to it, or they might have callbacks, but there's no real plot. It's just a bunch of shows that are out there on the whiteboard that have no lines between them whatsoever in the conspiracy lines. But so yeah, those are my three major things, and I think that's why this one, why Race to the Edge, or just the whole DreamWorks Dragons, is probably among one of the stronger, if not, I don't want to say it's the strongest because I haven't watched all movie-based shows, but it's definitely up there for me in the top three.
Apparently, I just found out that there's a Trolls, a TV show based on Trolls.
Let's not talk about that. Well, I'm done with my spiel. Who's next?
No, your spiel's made me tired.
Yeah, we are at the hour 30 minute mark.
No, I mean just I don't know, I'm gonna say, because I've never ever thought about it or made a comment about it before, I think this show is canonical. I think that there's two different types of movie-based TV shows. There's the ones that go for the one-off filler comedy types, and then there's the ones that go for plot like this. And when you go for plot like Dragons, it's actually hard to make something that isn't good because you have if there's a plot, you have to think through it. You have to think about what emotions you're putting into it. You have to think about what the end goal is. And if you go for a long time, like I'm going to go back to Clone Wars or Dragons, there's going to be ups and downs for sure. But overall, I never didn't want to watch a season when it came out. So I think it was a great show. And that's about it.
Okay. Wolf, pop this up.
Yeah, I can agree. Yeah, as a final thought, I guess I could say, yeah, a lot of people will say the show is terrible, that it is soulless, that it is just a cash in, and yeah, to that I can say that this show is definitely not that. Is it perfect? By no means. Does it have its faults? Absolutely. But as someone who grew up during the 90s and lived during the 90s and saw what a lot of cartoon shows that were cash-ins, where the writers didn't care about what they were doing, and I've seen what terrible actually looks like, and this is far from that. If you want terrible, go watch the Ace Ventura Pet Detective animated series. Go watch the Jumanji animated series. Go watch the Men in Black animated
Please
series.
Stop. You're bringing up all horrible memories here.
Go watch the Mask animated series.
Oh no, I knew you were gonna.
Go watch,
You're killing me.
many other animated series that were based on movies that came out, a lot of those during the 90s that weren't good. If you want a really great one, go watch the Mortal Kombat animated series.
What? There was a.
I
never heard
look
of this one, but Actually,
I've watched a lot of
just
those, and I
remember
grew up during a lot of those, and I can remember those shows,
I've seen some.
and I
literal
can look
shit.
back on them, and well, some of them, and while I look back on them now and I find them enjoyable for different reasons, some of that is just
It's so
some
bad,
of,
it's
like for the
good.
Mortal Kombat one, it's so bad, it's funny, it's good. And then for others, like I look back on them and they weren't good. I remembered enjoying them when I was a kid, but again, I'm a kid. I don't have a lot of taste back then.
Yeah.
And as I've
Actually,
gotten older, I can
also-
look back on them and say, yeah, they had their faults. And if I compare those to Race to the Edge, to Riders of Berk, to Defenders of Berk, I see something that is good, that is genuinely good, where the writers did care a lot. Because if they didn't, we would not have gotten what we did get at all, anywhere near close. That everyone who worked on the show cared about their work and enjoyed what they were doing. So for me, yes, certainly it's better than other movie-based shows. And
One more I want to add before we move on is that I just remember the Aladdin TV series, and I just want to say, everyone who I understand that if you don't like the animation on the Dragons TV show, I get it. It's obviously not in the same level as the movies. But show me another show like the Aladdin TV series where the characters just for no particular reason die as the animation presents them. There's a moment in the Aladdin TV series where he just looks at I think it's Iago for a second, and then he just stares ahead with open eyes. He doesn't even blink. It just looks like Aladdin die while he's standing. It's hilarious. So
Well, there are
yeah.
some points in Race to the Edge where their characters aren't moving and they're like frozen while other characters are moving, and it's kind of creepy.
Oh, really?
The dead-eyed
Yeah.
I
stare.
need to.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to look at
I need to look
the
back at-
Storehouse Island when it's opening. Not it's I think it's Snotlout when Spitelout is presenting the storehouse. As he's walking through, there's some characters, like one with an arm in the air, but he's like not doing anything. But there's like one character that's clapping next to him, but he's just standing still. It's very creepy.
I'll check it out. So anyway, the last question I want to talk to you guys about is
Before you get to that, well, no, go ahead. No, go ahead.
So the last thing I want to ask you guys is: do you really think that the TV show is canon or not?
Oh God.
But I but I have a feeling we can keep that for next
Yeah, that should be next week. Do you want this? Do you want
So
this recording to go for another hour, HC? Because I will make it
no,
go for an
Oh.
hour. If you want to talk about
no,
that.
let me try and be suspenseful for next week, Crush.
No, yeah, I will be then. That's why you don't
Okay.
ask that question
So
this week. I'm gonna edit that out.
no,
Then. I'm gonna
I
edit out
didn't
that
plan.
question.
I didn't. I told you before the recording, behind the scenes here on the Berkcast. But anyway,
Am,
yes.
wait, am I allowed to ask a Speedfire extra question, Ron?
Yeah, you wouldn't be
Yeah, sure.
wouldn't be Voyager on the show without her extra question.
Awesome. All right. What was your favorite dragon that was introduced in the show?
That was I wanted to ask that question actually. Dang it.
You
Ha.
know, I think that I really like the Thunderdrome.
If I could have a personal dragon, it would be the Changewing. However, my favorite design was, I really like the Death Song's design. If they had the cinch tail that was like thin like the Death Song, I would have really liked it because it would have been pretty much like a gecko, which I think is cool.
A thin cinch tail would have been my absolute
Yeah,
favorite,
exactly. Me and Wolf had the same idea.
but
Actually, second
my
favorite of
favorite
mine would be the
design.
Red.
Don't weight shame the Singe Tails. What are we? Excuse you.
It's not weight shaming.
Sorry, I have to weight shame it. That flat, wide design just bothers me.
Yeah, it really.
It takes away from it. That dragon would be so more threatening and cool if it was just really thin and slender. I have to
I'll
weight
be
shame it a
honest.
little bit.
A lot of the dragons, just like in the show, either just have a few more points than a couple of the other dragons, or their like wings are shaped a little bit different. I don't. It got to a point where they were kind of like, I don't know how to draw a different kind of lizard, in my opinion. But we haven't heard everybody's favorite dragons yet.
I would have to say the Death Song was probably my favorite just for how colorful it was and how it's like very reminiscent of a butterfly almost. Like I love the coloration and the design of the Death Song. And is there any other dragon? Yeah, I would say the Death Song. The Dramillion was a lot of fun. I love the kind of almost kangaroo likeness of the Dramillion, but I think design wise, the Death Song kind of takes it for me.
Mhm.
Voyager, what was yours? Changewing?
Mine would no, it was actually the Sentinels.
Oh,
Mm.
those were cool.
I loved the way they were animated. Honestly, that's one of the things that really sold it for me was like, oh, cool. Like, it makes so much sense as an animal that could actually exist, but doesn't. Just that, like, their ability to camouflage and hibernate for long times. But at the same time, they have this kind of mythological sense to them that a lot of the dragons in this show don't have, just because we accept them
Mhm.
as creatures that live in the world. But the Sentinels seemed like something very, very special, very rare, and very interesting, and that was why they were my favorite.
Yeah, talking about the animation for the Sentinels is great. I love that just how they really made them kind of jerk and tear as they started moving finally, like very much kind of similar to a statue, how you would expect a statue to kind of rip off of its pedestal in a way. It was just a really great idea from the show's creators, I think, to have them animate in that way when they first start moving.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
So I would agree, it's a really great dragon design, yeah.
Mhm. Okay, so we said our favorite dragons. Anything else?
Yeah, to end us off, I would say whether you love or hate the show, whether you enjoyed it or didn't, no matter what you think of it, the show isn't really harmful to How to Train Your Dragon in the long run. It's more helpful than anything because one, it gives us something to pass the time until the second and the third movie. And it also gives us a way to get new people interested in this series and allows us to talk with them and enjoy what they might have to say and their thoughts on things. So overall, I think the show's not a bad thing that we got it, and it's not a bad thing that it exists. And I'm glad that it exists, and I'm glad that we got the show.
bet it caused more fan fictions through controversy than it did for inspiration. Some people are like, you know what, I hate this, so I'm gonna make a fan fiction about the other way it happened.
Which is fine.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's exactly.
And it's resulted in some really interesting stuff. So I mean, overall, I would say the show has been helpful in whatever way you look at it, in whatever way it's given us some interesting stuff, some interesting people to talk with and discuss with. So I would say the show's definitely been enjoyable and an interesting ride.
Indeed.
Mhm.
So I think that's all for this episode of the Berkcast. We hope you enjoyed. If you want to share your thoughts on the entire show, you can do this in the comments section on our Tumblr, where we are known as Berkcast Team, on Twitter, where we are Berkcast with capital B, capital C. We are all also on the How to Train a Dragon Discord and the Berk Online forums. So tune in next time when we discuss if Race to the Edge and the entire TV show is canon or not. Feel free to share your thoughts on this also in the comments section as a lead-in for next week. So until that time, though, I was HC.
I was Rush.
I was Voyager.
And I've been Wolf.
And we will talk to you all next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.